Europe was controlled and governed by absolute monarchs, kings and kingdoms, and always fighting among themselves for position. We had by then, of course, started a new kind of a system in this country, the free world, which became the free world, a democracy, and the United States was the first significant example of that, and it has really changed the world. But up until then, these contests between the different countries, primarily in Europe, resulted in war more than peace. Anyway, going back to World War I, I have to run this fast forward pretty well, we don't have time. The rise of Germany under the Kaiser and the expansive philosophies of him and the German people resulted in World War I, and wound up with France, England, finally the United States, and a few other countries beating the Germans. It made the mistake after the war of imposing very severe sanctions on Germany. The so-called war reparations were just backbreaking, billions and billions of dollars that they had imposed upon Germany in the Treaty of Versailles, that they had to pay every year to make up for the cost of the war they had caused. It seemed like righteous retribution, perhaps, but it crippled Germany completely. They also had armed controls on Germany, and of course the other countries of the world as well, including the U.S. Navy, for example. The Army was almost disbanded. But it was preordained that Germany could not live under those conditions, and that resulted in the rise of a fanatic Corporal Adolf Hitler, who was able to stir up the people and get a tremendous following. He was a great orator, very dictatorial, turned out to be, he was very ruthless. But anyway, he finally gained control of Germany and then agreed to, got the people to go along and led them into breaking out of the traps that World War I had left them in. And, finally, he became chancellor and then dictator, sort of through a democratic process, but he took over the complete control of Germany, organized the thing, fired up the youth, and one of the first steps then was to expand into what they called the legitimate German nation. He took over Austria, parts of Czechoslovakia. In the meantime, the other European countries, the United States also, were trying to appease him and keep from getting another war going so soon after the first one. It wasn't even paid for yet. Finally, though, under some mutual protection treaties, when Hitler decided to move west and invade Poland, England and France declared war on him and consistent with a protective treaty that they had. That started really World War II and the world concept going. Russia was always laying out there. The communist revolution had taken place after World War I, and Stalin was now strongly in charge. It was a dictatorship. They were feeling their way and trying to expand their hegemony in Eastern Europe and Asia, and got control of some of the border states there in Central Europe. When the Western powers, France and England, declared war, and England sent an expeditionary force to the continent, Hitler struck back and drove the Englishmen almost right into the ocean, and they evacuated at Dunkirk in Belgium, and managed to get about 500,000 people almost miraculously back across the channel and back into England. France fell very quickly.
Using a lot of little boats that they called for.
Well, anything they had, barges, tramp boats, the whole thing. They did get a bunch of them back. Then they quickly overran France. France didn't put up much of a battle. They were still crippled with members of World War I and had lost about half of their manhood in World War I, so they didn't put up much of a fight. So then England was sitting there by itself. That's a weird in this country were engaged in a lot of arguments between the doves and the hawks. Some wanted to intervene, some didn't. Politically, it wasn't very, it just couldn't pull it off, although President Roosevelt by then, we were just coming out of the Depression. This was in the late 30s. He was trying to support the British, who were really all alone on an island, if you will. Hitler was trying to figure some kind of way to invade England. They tried. The British put up noble defenses, especially their Air Force. Hitler was bombing and wiped out towns like Coventry and bombing London day in and day out. But now in the meantime, it gets complicated on a worldwide basis. Hitler had made a deal with the Russians, although they were really basically his enemies, but he made a deal with them to stay out of the war. And then he made a deal with Mussolini in Italy and with the head guy in Japan, where they were led by militarists under General Tojo, to form what they call the Axis, the tripartite Axis. And they made a treaty of mutual collaboration that allowed the Italians to move into North Africa and take territory without anybody objecting to it, and they moved into Eritrea and Ethiopia and that part and captured that. Mussolini was himself a minor dictator of sorts. While all that was going on out in the East, the Japanese were looking for running room. In the meantime, the United States had imposed sanctions on Japan to try to contain them. They were trying to reach into Asia and some of the islands and expand their empire. After a while, they responded to those pressures and decided they had no way out but to attack the United States, because the United States had control of the world, if you will, or the ocean world with their fleet. The fleet was based in Pearl Harbor. The Japanese decided, without declaring war, to try to sneak in, and were successful in sneaking in some of their carriers, bombing Pearl Harbor and wiping out a big part of the fleet. Luckily, the aircraft carriers were out at sea on an exercise, and that was one of the big turning points, if you will, that still left our aircraft carriers intact. Roosevelt, as I said, meantime, was trying to help the English with having a hard time politically. We were already on what they call North Atlantic Patrol. They call it a neutrality patrol, but really helping to get goods and services to Europe, to Russia, to England, to try to keep the war going, because they couldn't really do that very well just in England. Meanwhile, Hitler had expanded, controlled Norway. The Russians took Finland. Between the Italians and them, all Austria, and then they invaded North Africa and conquered a big portion of that. And things were indeed very grim. However, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, as terrible as it was, it gave, it almost immediately gave Roosevelt the opportunity to declare war on the Axis power with the full support of the American people and the Congress. They had no more resistance then. The only thing to do was go to war. That was December 7th, 41. The war had already been going on over 2 years in Europe. Almost immediate. We could go on and on with this, but I think you needed that background to understand why these wars happen and maybe get some lessons, because we seem to forget them about you can't just get along in the world in isolation, and kind of a global economy and a global world that has to function in unison. You can't just pick and choose among them. When immediately when the war was declared, then the whole American culture jumped right in. Our big economic potential is what really won the war. They started to manufacture all kinds of war materials, building thousands and thousands of airplanes, ships. The Kaiser Jarl on the West Coast got to where it was turning out a Liberty ship every day, if you can believe it. that's where a good part of what I call the women's rights movement started. All the men were gone. They immediately put in a draft, drafted everybody who could find his way into the recruiting station. And so the women had to go to work. Rose's derivative was kind of the symbol of that. They had women in these shipyards and building ships and that sort of thing. And they liked it so well they never quit. And that's where we better get a little more personal because we're really short of time here. But I had been in the Navy, gone to the Naval Academy in 1934, out in 38. Was in the fleet on the battleship Tennessee from 38 to 40. My vision was defective. In those days you needed 20/20 eyesight uncorrected to retain a commission in the war, and I didn't pass my examination after what they call the 2-year probationary period, so I came out. By then we were already almost in the war, but the so-called Bureau of Medicine in the Navy was still on the peacetime standard. On I went. It was kind of a shame being not too modest about it, that the guy who had spent all this time and money getting ready for a war, and here we had a war coming on, and they kicked a guy like me out, but that's the way bureaucracy works. So I came home and cut the little warehouse business in Lafayette, and by the time I got the building built and was started, we were just in it a few months when Pearl Harbor hit. And so, back I went. I got a commission, actually dated the next day, as a lieutenant junior grade. My first assignment was to send me to Miami, where we opened up a little school. I should go back and say immediately when the war was declared, the Germans were really ready with their submarine fleet. They had a tremendous submarine fleet in place. They had all these bases in western France by now. They knew how to do it. We had ships in this country running up and down the East Coast, unescorted. All the lights were on along the coast. The submarines just moved in, and I'd say within 3 weeks, they started knocking them off, just like, with the turkey shoot. They just dumped ship after ship. They finally learned we didn't have any escort vessels to speak of. We were using fishing boats and Coast Guard cutters and tugs and kind of anything they had to make ships convoy service. What I call the real Navy. My ex-classmates were out in the Pacific in the real Navy with the destroyers, the battleships, the carriers, the cruisers. And they were busily engaged with the Japanese fleet, with the landings and all that was going on over there, covering those moving troops back and forth, and of course trying to fight off the Japanese Navy, which was a very imposing group by that time, because we had lost so much at Pearl Harbor. So they didn't have any ships nor experienced people to spare for this escorted convoy. Within a couple of weeks, I got assigned to command what they call the PC boat, a 175-foot steel-hulled submarine station with depth charges, and we had one little 3-inch gun. They were strictly anti-submarine. Had about 75 people on board, and ran convoys up and down the East Coast from New York to Key West and to Trinidad and that area. After a very few months, they started coming out with a new line of vessels called a destroyer escort, which was about 320 feet long, had a crew of about 300 people. A seagoing vessel, not necessarily in the North Atlantic. It looked like a little course up there, but nevertheless, we then were involved in North Atlantic convoy, working primarily New York, and on the other end at various ports in England, Gibraltar, North Africa, and what have you. Had an interlude of about 6 months in that, where my division of destroyer escorts was assigned with what they call a baby flat top. It was a tanker converted as an aircraft carrier with fighters and torpedo bombers on board and one radar plane. By that time, with the convoys thing organized, we were doing pretty well against the German submarines, but until we got in a car in the middle of the Atlantic where we could not get air cover from Newfoundland, from the Azores, from England, and what have you. There was that corridor, and the Germans laid up in there and operated in wolf packs. And when they would catch a convoy and take after it, like a bunch of dogs chasing rabbits, they had all the best of it. So we went out with this carrier and launched this radar plane, usually in dusk. And he would fly around and try to catch these German submarines. They were refueling from these big supply submarines out in the middle of the Atlantic. So when we first did that, there were about 4 or 5 such groups incidentally. My group never got one. But some of the other groups had real great success, to the extent that Hitler was so concerned they didn't know what was happening to his submarines. Then he recalled them all for a period, and that was kind of the beginning of the decline of the submarine threat and the so-called victory at sea. After that happened, I was still on that ship, the Blair, and went through the, by then the invasion of Normandy had taken place. We went in with a couple of convoys behind that. Incidentally, on the day before the invasion, I was in Plymouth, and it was the greatest beehive of activity you ever saw. Plymouth is a town in southern England. And I actually went ashore trying to see if I couldn't find Lucian. I knew he was somewhere around there. I never succeeded, but I never saw such pandemonium in all my life. They were loading all these guys on these boats and equipment, and just couldn't believe it. It was almost like trying to get this crowd in here. And never found Lucian. Anyway, we left the next day with a convoy, and then we listened on the radio. We never were allowed to transmit, but we listened all the time to the broadcast, and we learned about the invasion. And then the next time I came back, we went on into Cherbourg with the next convoy, and I went ashore then looking for Lucian. But by then, as best I could learn, he had gone west towards Nantes or Brest or somewhere in there. He could tell you more about that. Then the North Atlantic got pretty well cleared. The Germans were no longer the great threat that they were. There were a lot of technical developments that caused that as well. And I got transferred to what they call an APD, which is a destroyer converted for special service. I had an underwater demolition unit on board. It was the so-called frogman, if you've ever heard of those. Our objective was to go out before an invasion somewhere and try to clear the mines and clear the out in the Pacific. There are coral reefs around nearly all of these atoll-type islands to try to butt the channel through there so that the landing forces could come in. Got in on the tail end of that in the Pacific. The real assignment there was for the invasion of Japan. We had our orders. We were supposed to go in with through the Marine Division in Southwest Honshu. We were training for that. Okinawa got secured about that time. And then they dropped the atomic bomb and everything seemed fine. There was no heart bleeding about that at all. If you read now, you find that the prognosis was that we were going to probably lose 1.5 million men trying to invade Japan, and probably kill 3 or 4 million Japanese as they fought from house to house, as they would have if the emperor had ordered them to do so. Our kind, it turns out too in intelligence that's recently been released, that our ships were supposed to be about 80% expendable, because we would go in ahead of the invasion and try to feel out the coastal defenses and what have you, and do the clearance, and wasn't too worried about it. So we were all very pleased when they dropped the atomic bomb, and it hadn't occurred to me yet, at least, to apologize to them for that. A lot of people are now saying we should be doing. After that, I thought it'd be coming home, that it had no more need for frogmen, but lo and behold, they ordered my UDP team home, and made my ship and me the division commander of a squadron, or the squadron commander of a squadron of YMSs. Those were minesweeper vessels. And we went into the Sea of Japan and the China Sea and up north in the Straits of Kaido and tried to locate and sweep up and destroy all of the undersea mines that mostly our Air Force had sprinkled all over the place. Nobody knew where they were. You can imagine a guy in a plane being ordered to go sweeping, or mining, had gotten way ahead of mine sweeping. Many of these mines were what they call acoustic mines, which went off on the propeller sound. Some of them were magnetic mines, which went off from the magnetism of a ship passing over. Others were the old-fashioned horn mines you always see in the movies, where on contact they went off. You hit the exploder on it and it set them off. Many of them were combinations of those acoustic and magnetic. Some of them were set such as the first ship that went over, it merely clicked over a notch. You could set them that the 10th ship or the 5th ship would set it off, so you never were sure when you could clean the place up. We swept in there with magnetic sweeps. We had a big coil that we towed, creating a magnetic field to reproduce what the equivalent of a ship. The minesweeper ships, I wasn't the minesweeper, I was just the mothership for them. They were all made of wood or brass. They had no steel in them at all. They also had out in the bow a magnetic hammer that made a noise that replicated the frequency and sound of a propeller noise. And then we towed kites that when they engaged the anchor wire on a floating mine, partly submerged floating mine, it would cut that cable and it would float, and then we'd shoot it and blow it up. We just did this over and over, and finally when you had done that and thought you had a clear channel through there, you would bring in what they called a guinea pig. It was a Liberty ship filled with what I call ping pong balls. So it was unsinkable, if you will. All of the tanks were filled with these ping pong balls, and up on the controls were all remote controlled. They had a signalman and a quartermaster who steered it, and that was all. The guys would volunteer for this duty, and if they stayed with it for 6 weeks, they could go home, so we had plenty of volunteers. They would just cruise up and down the swept channel and see if they could blow themselves up. We never did boot one during the time that I was there. And that since I was captain of the ship, I had to wait for a relief before I could come home, so I waited for 6 months or so after the war. Finally, my relief showed up, and I just went ashore in Okinawa and lived in a tent there, kind of like this, for a week or two, got a cot in there, and kept snooping around looking for a ship coming home. And finally found one. There was a ship coming back, and I talked to the skipper. He said, well, you can stand the deck watch, you can come, but he says, I've lost all of my officers who were qualified, and so you and I'll stand watch and we'll go home. And so that's what I did. Watch means 4 hours on and 4 hours off all the way home, but it was no problem. 7,000 or 8,000 combat Marines coming home from duty, and it was pretty easy to handle. They were just as glad to get home. So that's kind of the end of my war career. I'll just sum it up saying that in spite of all that, in spite of being at sea during the whole war, in spite of being captain of the ship all throughout the war, never had a really close call with a gunshot. We dropped a lot of depth charges and all, but we never did get credit for a kill. We might claim one or two, but never confirmed. Never had a face-to-face shot with the enemy in spite of all of that, so somebody was looking after us.
Well, I don't know if you realize it, but that's about as good a recap of the setup that you'll ever get on World War II. And what he said about the captain of the ship, I heard a Cyprien Robespierre story the other day. He volunteered for the Army and had been in there a while, and he came up to the supply sergeant and said, I lost my rifle. Can I have another? He said, no, you have to pay for it. He said, pay for it? He said, suppose I lost my Jeep. He said, you'd have to pay for that too. He says, well, now I know why the captain always goes down with his ship. My operation wasn't as extensive as all of it. I guess the first part of my experience with the enemy was when we shipped out of New York, and I thought we were headed to Africa, but we ended up in England. They were putting 2 or 3 officers on every boat in an 80-boat, 6-knot freight convoy. Well, things went well for 5 days until we were out of coverage from the PBYs. We had 5 little Canadian corvette boats as an escort. When the Wolfpack hit, they picked the largest boats first. They were unopposed. We each had a 3-inch gun on the deck, but no ammunition to practice with, and we had never seen that kind of weapon anyhow. After 3 or 4 nights of beautiful sights of ammunition ships going up and boats with locomotives strapped on the deck going down, and 1 or 2 had fighter planes strapped on that deck, and they were picked off early in the game. When we got down to a certain point, our captain told us that the convoy had been disbanded and every boat was on its own. My boat could do 9 knots instead of 6. So it pulled up into the ice floes of Baffin Bay near Greenland, because at that time the submarines couldn't work on the ice, and you had ice 2 and 3 feet thick there. We stayed there for several days, shoveling snow off of the deck on a boat that had been at Durban, Africa, had all kind of fans but no heat. And after the 5th day, we came over and skirted the coast of Greenland, made a break for Iceland, skirted the coast of Iceland, and came into Liverpool, England. We later found out that 16 of the 80 got across. That was the month of February, 43. It was the month of the heaviest tonnage loss of the war. Anyhow, when I got to England, I was assigned to the 29th Division, as I told you earlier, hopefully as an intelligence, in an intelligence capacity. But what had happened, they had drawn the intelligence personnel out of this division and sent them to Africa to replace the losses there. But then they had filled in from within. So where I was assigned to a heavy weapons machine gun company, and I had to learn about mortars, I had to learn how to take a machine gun apart, blindfolded, and all that kind of stuff. Well, that went on for about 3 months, and then somebody found out that I had a little education. So they sent me to battalion headquarters as a battalion adjutant, known as an S1, in charge of the administration. And from there to regiment as a regimental adjutant. And I was promoted then up to the rank of captain. That's where I was when we invaded Omaha Beach. I didn't know it, but Alden was just 1 day late in Plymouth when I boarded a boat there. I crossed the channel in a boat that held 210 people in a terrible storm. I think you'll agree with that. The only reason we were able to get across was that no one in the German army thought that we could possibly make a crossing in that storm. And Rommel had gone back home to Germany and left his troops and so forth. Anyhow, we made it across. Everybody was seasick, but we got there. There was confusion on the beach, I assure you. We landed, supposed to land on that section of the beach that was known as Dog Red. And the whole Omaha Beach was all divided up. Every boat had its place to land. We ended up on Easy Green, which was almost into the 1st Division section of the beach. That helped some because the 1st Division had most of the fire coming from the left, and we landed just to the right of them, so we had a little protection in between. The beach was maybe 200 yards wide when we landed. Tide, they had a tide there of 19 feet. So depending on what time we landed in the course of the day, how wide that beach was. That was halfway across the beach. About halfway across the beach. I hope they're ours. people didn't make it out of that boat. But those that did got up to this wall and had some protection until a few of the machine gun emplacements and pillboxes were destroyed. Then from there to the cliff, there was a 90-foot cliff ahead of us. The Germans were all through that on top of it and on each end of the beach. There was a marsh area, maybe 50 yards wide, that was thoroughly mined with S mines. An S mine is a mine that had two little prongs sticking up out of the ground about so high. If you tripped it, it jumped up 3 feet and exploded with shrapnel. So it was a personnel killing type of deal. We lost a lot of people in my division on that beach. And we finally got to the top at about top of that hill, that cliff, at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. From there we had a fairly easy deal for maybe a quarter of a mile to a half a mile up to a little town called St. Laurent. I spent the night there in a graveyard, in a little vault in a graveyard, and sending out messages to the 3 battalion commanders for our regimental commander, whom I was representing now. 2 days later, we had traveled another 2 miles, losing more men, and we hit what was known as the inundated area. They had blown a couple of dams and flooded an area there about 1.5 miles wide and 10 miles long, and we had to cross that. Well, we brought we had some supporting amphibious jeeps following back of us a day or 2 after we landed. And we were supposed to use those to get across. But we found out that they had canals going through it, and the jeeps would go up the bank of the canal and go down, but couldn't. So we ended up with a bunch of jeeps facing down into the canal, and that was it. So it got to be a individual foot crossing of that area. Fortunately, we had very little resistance on the far side, because one of our patrols had gone in the night before, crossed in the middle of the night with 10 men, Lieutenant Miller with 10 men, and they found a place where the Germans, all of the officers of that particular German outfit were having a meeting. They surrounded that thing and they slaughtered them. The rest of the German troops backed up about 1 mile. So we crossed that inundated area with very little opposition. By the end of the 3rd day, to show you the intensity of the battle, by the end of the 3rd day, a regiment, a combat regiment, has a regimental commander in charge of 3 battalions, and he's a full colonel, and each battalion has a lieutenant colonel in charge of that battalion. Been all through this training. By the end of the 3rd day, we have lost our regimental commander and all 3 battalion commanders. This went on through the hedgerow country with replacements moving up. Second in command would move up and take over, and that's how it worked. It got pretty intense at times, particularly in the hedgerow area, because that's where we ran into the best trained German troops called the Schutzstaffel. They were the elite of the German army, and they had 2 divisions of those opposing the corps that I was in. They also had paratroopers that they had converted to fight as infantrymen, and these were fanatics. I mean, if they wanted to surrender and came up with their hands up, you better not turn your back, because they probably had a hand grenade in there. It was that kind of deal. Anyway, after a while, a few months of that is when I told you I made up my mind to come back here and lead a quiet life. I had some nice experiences through there. One day when we were waiting for the Air Corps to assemble 1,000 planes to give us a heavy bombing of the town of St. Lo, which was a communications wheel center that we had to take and the Germans had to hold. We had 3 days there waiting for the Air Corps to get that act together. They came over, and The first bomb they dropped it short. And the commander of the Air Corps was in a Jeep on the ground, and they happened to hit his Jeep. That was the beginning of it. But they did a good job on St. Louis, too. But while I was there, I'd gotten in with an artillery observer and gotten into the second floor of a home there. Looking across, we could see across roads the German vehicles were working about 3/4 of a mile to the front. And we were having fun, trying to, like shooting ducks, we were trying to anticipate how quick to get that shot at that point with this vehicle coming that fast. And they had a ladder going up to the second floor, not steps. And after a while, here comes somebody up there. I looked at it was a general officer. And he says, "What are y'all doing?" I said, "Come on, gentlemen, have fun. We're knocking off some of these German vehicles." It was General Omar Bradley. He had a driver from Appaloosa, this guy. So we talked French and gumbo and all that kind of stuff. Anyhow, from there we went on below beer, I'd say maybe 50 miles into France. And the Germans tried to run a penetration all the way back to Arras, tried to cut off everything that was in northern France and in the Cherbourg Peninsula. And they put about 30 divisions into that. A division is about 15,000 men. And several of them were armored divisions, tanks. Well, when they got into the hedgerow area where we were, a lot of the tanks got knocked out, and that would block a road completely, with the hedges on each side of the narrow road. So they got stymied there. And about that time, Patton came in with his Third Army, and he was cut loose to try to get around them, in front of them, and go around and try to envelop them. We could have enveloped those 30, 40, 50 German divisions. This war would have ended 6 months earlier. Eisenhower begged Montgomery, who was north of, maybe some of you have heard of the Falaise Gap. He had the north shore of that. Patton was coming around from the south and had been instructed to stop at Falaise. That's as far as he could go. Montgomery was to take his army and meet him there and envelop the whole German army that was involved in this operation. It took Montgomery 3 days to get going. Eisenhower had to call Churchill